These troops are presumably training in Russia to be used against Ukraine. What does this mean for the next phase of this war?
First of all, they're not only being trained to be used in the front. Russia has hundreds of thousands of troops, 1,500 Koreans. What they're being also trained for is an eventual attack on South Korea, where we have 28,000 troops, along with our South Korean treaty allies. I want to underline what this does is it, again, indicates we are facing a global military challenge by nuclear-armed states to the international order we put together after World War II. The second point is, I don't want to get political, I haven't heard either presidential candidate who will be the commander-in-chief, one of them in the next 4 months, say anything about this to the American people, whereas I can't think of anything more important to be telling our fellow Americans.
What will they learn? What will these North Korean troops learn in Russia that they couldn't learn at home?
First of all, they'll learn how to cope with American equipment and people who are trained by the United States. I mean, as a former infantryman, there's nothing like frontline combat experience. Not only the things you learn in a technical sense, you also learn a lot about yourself. You learn how to, frankly, get down when you're being shot at and things like that sound obvious, but trust me, if not, I didn't.
Well, then, thank you for your service. As always, Ambassador, will they be put into Ukraine so they can have a live firing experience? To what extent will Ukraine be involved in this, if at all?
Well, we don't know so far. I suspect that the Russians will be doing this not because they expect to get a whole lot more, if you will, cannon fodder from the North Koreans, but in order to show solidarity. Up to now, and this is a very important point, despite this recent BRICS meeting in Russia with China and India and such, Russia doesn't really have a whole lot of support. People buy their oil, to be sure, because it's at a discount. But no country has joined Russia, not even its close ally Belarus on Ukraine's northern flank. No country has joined Russia, and China won't even give it lethal weapons. So Russia is seeking desperately some kind of international, if you will, international legion to show that it's not alone. And the best it can come up with is the pathetic North Koreans.
John Kirby asking today at the White House, speaking for the national security apparatus inside this administration, what does Kim Jong-un think he's getting out of this, Ambassador? Do you have an answer?
Well, first of all, he will get support. I mean, Russia, and to a lesser extent China, long since has moved away from the situation 20 years ago where they were working cooperatively with the U.S., with South Korea, with Japan, to try to stem North Korea's nuclear ambitions. Now, China is ambivalent, and Russia, in many respects, seems to be supporting the North Koreans in some of their technological development and production, which is very worrisome. So clearly, what Kim Jong-un is getting is something he needs. Even if there's anybody more isolated than Putin, it's Kim Jong-un. And he needs this, and he's going to make the most out of it.
The aforementioned John Kirby, as we consider a dangerous world, Ambassador, was also asked today about what's happening in Israel, remembering that Secretary of State Antony Blinken has made his way to Israel as we stand by for Israel's response to Iran. But there's also continued fighting between Israel and Hamas and Israel and Hezbollah on the northern border. This is John Kirby at the White House briefing earlier when he was asked about Israel's strategy, specifically in Lebanon.
They have a right to defend themselves. There are legitimate threats that Hezbollah still poses to the Israeli people. I mean, rockets and missiles are still being fired at Israeli cities. So let's not forget what Hezbollah continues to be able to do. That's number one. Number two, we have said many, many times that we don't support daily strikes into heavily populated areas, and that remains the case today.
When you hear John Kirby talking like that, Ambassador, to what extent do you see this administration having any influence on what happens next? And if the Secretary of State is in Israel, what does that tell you about the time frame on a response to Iran?
Tony Blinken who's never heard a shot fired in anger, isn't going to tell Bibi Netanyahu, who was once wounded leading Israel's most elite commando force, when to do this or that military operation, including the strike on Iran. The Israelis will do it. In terms of the other, the Blinken trip and what we heard Kirby say, this administration has a split personality to some degree, and Kirby reflects that. Israel has the right to defend itself. It's being shot at, to be sure, but the administration defines defend yourself in a very, very passive way. You can shoot at missiles coming at you, but please do a ceasefire. Don't bomb Beirut. Why not? Why are we saying don't bomb heavily populated areas every day? The Israelis believe they are fighting a war, like we've fought a half a dozen wars since World War II. And believe me, we bombed populated areas in every one of them. Unlike the Israelis, we were never in an existential war since World War II. The Israelis are in one now. This is not helpful advice, trust me, and it's not being listened to, obviously.
Well, it's not being listened to, although I wonder, Ambassador, how worried you are about how this type of bombing continues to act as a recruitment tool and an opportunity to make more terrorists. Is this not part of the equation?
Look, one of the problems we have, and I lived through it, I was involved in it, is we draw all of our lessons about war from our field experiences trying to, on the back of a tank, yank very, very different societies into the 20th century in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that didn't work out. And believe me, trust me, I watched it. We were creating additional terrorists in a population that was neutral initially, and that can happen. But when a terrorist group becomes an organized army and governs a country, which Hamas did formally in Gaza and Hezbollah does essentially informally in all of Lebanon, they can recruit as many people as possible. They don't need Israeli bombings to create more recruits. Believe me, they get plenty of volunteers. And if they don't get volunteers, they will just dragoon people to fight with them. Nobody's going to argue with them. This is very different than, for example, al-Qaeda elements hiding in Anbar province in Iraq in 2004.